Hello, fellow adventurers. I'm Lewis Nichols, and I play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are a lot of books that you can buy to enhance your gaming experience. You also might have noticed you can get a lot of this information online, but we'll just ignore that. I mean, you've got to have something to fill up all those bookcases, right? These tomes of knowledge fall into three indistinct categories. There are those made for players, those just for DMs, and a bunch that lie somewhere in between. I'd say Eberron is definitely one of the latter. It's primarily a source book for a unique campaign setting. Are you a DM who's not a world builder? Nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of source books out there. Some are official, like this one. Some are published by independent operators. In fact, I hope to publish my first sometime next year. You might also want to buy Eberron for other reasons. There's information for players here, and maybe you just like the art. If you have the disposable income and you just like having D&D books, there is no reason not to get this one. The important part is that disposable income. This video is largely for people who need to be intelligent with their purchases or just have limited shelf space. The book's 15-page introduction sets off to establish the feel of the game world Eberron's developers have built for us. They lay down a premise of a war-torn land where a very new, very fragile status quo has just been set in place. The Great War ended just 2 years ago with the establishment of new states. It also tells us that factions predating the war still remain. The feel one gets from these first few pages, or the feel I got anyway, was they are aiming for a very post-medieval environment, a home for almost modern characters. They use phrasing and imagery that push your sensations all the way up into the 1920s, substituting magic for technology, but retaining the feeling of progressive potential, overshadowed with vile and cyclopean old magic. This is, of course, what I'm reading into it. There's plenty of room to interpret it or bend it to your will as you see fit. I see a setting for the Mummy movies, or maybe even Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. Anybody remember that movie? Less tech in both cases, and more magic. Shades of gray on the morality scale also seem to be a major theme. Chapter 1 is 80 pages talking about character creation. It discusses tweaks on existing races, or species if you're getting into the new age, such as half-elves, gnomes, and so forth. This is what I call world building by character race. Eberron is doing exactly that, as races are tied directly to one of the strongest layers of factions on their world. But the highlight here is clear. Eberron is the home of two pretty significant D&D playable races. These are the Kalishtar and the Goblinoids, of course. All right, enough with the crickets. Haven't had them around for a while. If you're worried, just look at what's on the screen right now. It'll sort everything out. It's just a joke. Now, those two races, they are here, but Warforged and Changeling are what we're really around for. Fact is, my purchase of the book came when I found that I had an old pre-COVID store credit in one of the local game shops. I picked it up specifically because I was preparing to run a Warforged in a new campaign. I know a lot of people don't like them, and they don't fit into every campaign setting, certainly not the traditional medieval ones. However, a lot of us are well past King Arthur settings, and will always be looking for redefining our fantasy worlds. Now, if that sounds a little insulting, I don't mean to be. There's nothing wrong with old Europe or Roman, Egyptian, Asian, Mesoamerican, whatever vibe you like. I don't use gunpowder myself, but I do like the idea of airships once in a while, and maybe even a railroad. Eberron is also where you'll find the Artificer class, so if you're not into that sort of vibe for your game, maybe it's not the book for you. I know some people hate it, but I know a lot of people love it too. Now, if you're just looking for some general source material, there's a lot more you should know about Chapter 1. First of all, there's 30 or so pages on group patrons. This is basically an in-game tool to focus your party. It's the Charlie of Charlie's Angels. They are financiers for the party, a conduit to advance services. It might be a government, a church, or a university. Eberron even suggests a newspaper. which I think is a really cool idea. I've honestly never considered the possibility of being an investigative reporter in a D&D setting. Finally, there are the dragon marked houses. I feel this is the really big idea of the Eberron project. As a part of character creation, players have the option of giving their character a dragon mark. This amounts to a subrace. For instance, instead of being a Lightfoot or Stout halfling, you might be a Mark of Hospitality halfling instead. Marks are segregated by race, creating the potential for strong factional divides. According to the lore, the marks are ancient. Those with particular marks eventually congregated into houses, creating economic monopolies centered on granted abilities. Important note, the book doesn't try to force a character with a dragon mark into the associated house. It's just an option. If I was running the setting, I would certainly push my players to take on dragon marks, as they are an integral part of the world. If half did, I'd be happy about it. Chapter 2 is a breakdown by nation state, of which there are 15, if I'm counting correctly. These are also distinct geographical regions, as most nations are. The chapter intro tells us this is a human-centric world, with other Velito existing in enclaves or sporadically mixed into the rest of the population. The chapter quite rapidly gets into the particulars of each area. It gives about a page and a half to each, sticking to a pretty strict format. Intro, 3 interesting bullet points, qualities of the locals, cities and sites, and ending with aftermath of the last war. I mean, really, they put it in the title. It's important, so I'm glad they've devoted time to it. If you're writing a story of a world recovering from a century of war, do it. Stay focused on your themes and your topics. This is a lesson for all of you world builders out there. If it's the land of dragons, always circle back to the dragons. If it's a world of wild weather, talk about the weather. The book doesn't dwell much on these alternate points. It's a paragraph for a city, leaving plenty for a DM to expand on. Mostly they are referring to the other important themes. What houses are in power, and what's the local drama? For the interesting things category, topics vary. For Dargoon, it stresses that it's a frontier nation and that bugbear and goblins are big players in the local landscape. For Kabara, it talks about ancient ruins and connections to demon cults. Next in part 2 are a few pages on what lies beyond. Even if you're never intending for the players to go so far, I feel that there shouldn't just be an impassable wall of forest at the edge of the map. Trade flows beyond, and immigrants may wander. There's more than enough space on Corvair, the prime continent, but context is always relevant. The chapter ends with religion in the game world. They establish this is not a place where the gods walk the realms, but that religion is important to community. They have 15 gods and 2 pantheons, plus 6 more faiths that appear to be more philosophical than divine in nature. Let's check one out. Spirits of the Past is an elf-only hero cult. The book suggests that following it as a cleric can get you a choice of grave, knowledge, or life domains. Pretty straightforward. Basically the idea of being religious without following a given deity. That's actually pretty normal throughout history, but something old D&D ignored in favor of pantheons. Even with 300 plus pages, you're never going to get into all the details of your world building project. In Chapter 3, they pick out the City of Sharn, City of Towers, as their exercise in urban detail. This place is as much sci-fi as it is fantasy, with towers stretching into the clouds. The city hosts 500,000 people, about as high as you're ever going to want to get in a setting even that's high magic. They did a good job of placing it geographically, easy access to the sea, and on a major river. The next few sections set the scene with a discussion of falling from the many skyways connecting towers. Apparently most of them have been idiot-proofed with featherfall, but there's definitely a chance your fall will end in a lethal dose of instant deceleration syndrome. The book reiterates how available magic is, giving prices for spellcasters for hire. There is a welcome section on holidays, something I always stress to world builders. There's a fair number of them too. Damn, we have sports and local government. There's a section on guilds. It's almost like they've been listening to my videos. I gotta say, it's a pretty good template to steal for your own world building projects. At this point, Eberron goes back to its organization based on geography and spends time talking about the different wards and districts of the city. They hit a few highlights for each one and move on quickly. Finally, the chapter ends with some brief sections on military and law enforcement. Chapter 4 gets us firmly into the book's DM section. It's titled Building Eberron Adventures, and it is essentially a small DMG tuned to the particulars of its setting. I'm not getting into the minutiae here. There's a lot of small topics covered, just like in the DMG. It starts out with building villains before getting into bad guy institutions like cults and rogue military. There are some decent maps, charts, and a few areas on the map are given even more focus for their unique adventuring opportunities. Now, I've covered Chapter 4 pretty quickly, but I should let you know it does cover 80 pages of these small packets of information. There's a lot there to disseminate. I feel like this is a good place to say, even if you're not running Eberron, you can still rip pieces out and make them part of your world and setting. Any of these factions can be imported, and certainly the encounter maps are plug and play. Hell, steal whole nations, or one of the pantheons, and slip it right in. Believe me, the developers won't mind, especially if you buy the book. Well, assuming that you're not going to try and publish it. If you are running Eberron, essentially verbatim, I would suggest starting a file where you add NPCs and develop local information as you go. Definitely check out the community and see what they've already done. Chapter 5 is Treasure. The booty section is a minor part of Eberron. It's direct, to the point 6 pages that exist to back up the rest of the lore. I bet there was a solid 15-minute discussion where the designers fought viciously over whether or not it should even be its own chapter. I would like to think this was decided by a D20 roll-off. It's not useless. We established that dragon shards are an integral reason for the high magic setting. Kyber crystals, Kyber dragon shards. Where have I heard that before? Anyway, these guys are the power source for airships, lightsabers, all the stuff that you would imagine would need a power source. A lot of the magical items listed here contribute to the sci-fi elements of the world. Eldritch machines, mundane household magic, which I totally dig. We have arcane goggles, cleansing stones, a prosthetic arm. I know, I'm making a little fun here, but seriously, there are a lot of bad magical items in major D&D publications. These are pretty good. There's just not a lot of them. Chapter 6. This is the Bestiary, a section that can sell a book all by itself. DMs need monsters, and we are willing to buy them. Eberron gives us 40 pages and about 40 entries. It seems like most of these are one extreme or the other. There's a good number of CR3 creatures or less to occupy your world. If you're running Eberron as your game world, you're obviously going to still use the monster manual to fill in the gaps. The chapter does have a lot of big bads for your consideration. These are the unique top-end toughs of the world. A CR 22 and 24 open things up. There's another 22 just a few pages later. There's an 18 and a 15. It's kind of a lull. But then a pair of 28s. The tome offers us a few small dinos and a number of automatons, including a CR 25 I didn't mention earlier. It's not a bad resource overall, but I only saw maybe 6 potential adversaries in the CR 6 to 12 range, which I think is the most useful. So what have we accomplished here? Should you buy the book? The strongest portion by far is the world building of Eberron, and well, it should be. That's the advertised purpose. If you like the idea of an unstable world that has a lot of pseudo-tech but is still fantasy, you should definitely invest. A week of reading, another week of campaign prep, and you could dive right in with nothing more than this book and a player's handbook. If you want to be a world builder but don't feel like you're there yet, it's another reason to buy this book or something like it. There's strong foundations here on which you can build, giving the world your own personality or just filling in some details as you run the game. Buying it for a general resource as a DM rates about a C+, in my opinion. You get some maps, but the monster variety isn't great. Magical items don't make up for it. You do get a copy of the classes and species that you're probably going to run into in the future. Face it, eventually, Warforged and Artificer are going to come up. But the biggest drawback as a general resource is that it's only useful in very specific kinds of worlds and ones that are not typical for D&D. Buying in as a player completely depends upon your DM. A lot of them don't even entertain the idea of those artificers in Warforged. And if I'm picking out a new world to run, I'm not necessarily going to be encouraged to choose one where my player already owns the manual. First time a player points out, oh well, House Durasco is actually married into the Boromar clan, and they are highly influential on the Council of Sharn, so this is definitely going to work. Well, alright, if it were my own lore and a player was that engaged, I'd be thrilled, so maybe I'm just jealous of my own example. Back to my Lithid therapist for another Mind Blast treatment. One more time, back to that central question. Should you buy the book? I can't tell you that. You're going to have to make the decision on your own. But I hope that I have given you the information to get there. If you're thinking about buying it for a DM friend or family member as a gift, I would say do it for sure. They will appreciate it and use it no matter what they think about the particulars. And just like that, here we are again. It's time to wrap up. Thank you for stopping by and listening to the end. Please do the stuff. Hit the like button, comment, subscribe. If you've enjoyed this video, others might too. And only about 5% of YouTube's RPG community has ever even had a chance to know that I exist. Your interaction with the station will bring them one step closer. Right now, I am in the basement of content providers, but you can move me up to the first floor, maybe even the second. Next week, we're getting back into world building with an overview of the forest biome. After that, we'll do an exercise or two, and at least one concerning this tree-covered land. Until then, I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day. Cheers.